Hey everybody, Greg here, and in this Canva tutorial, we're going to talk about how do you create your own custom templates within Canva, and specifically when you're doing so, how do you really take control of the spacing and make sure you get the spacing of all the elements in your design exactly how you would like them to be. Okay, so let's dive in. So the inspiration for this video came from one of my student questions over on Udemy, where I have a Canva master course. So I will post a link below for anybody that's interested in checking out that course. But let's take a look at the question that Chen Ming was asking. Okay, so they ask, I have enrolled in this course and so far so good. However, I'm still apprehensive about my ability to learn design, as I am not a design person, but this is a must-learn skill for me. So first, I would just say, you can do it, just stick with it. I think anything takes repetition, especially learning like the basic principles of graphic design. So I talk about some of those basic principles in my course, but of course you can check out YouTube and find lots of great resources online on the web. There are lots of great free courses where you can learn about the basics of design, and then it really is just practice, starting to do your own designs, and really just spending time so you start to get comfortable what makes a good design and what doesn't make a good design. So stay with it, you can do it, but let's get to the other part of your question. You're talking specifically about some of the custom templates I created in the course, and you say, do you use the rulers and guides for it? Please kindly advise, as I also want to get my hands dirty and create this sort of design. Okay, so you're asking, like, how do we get the even spacing between the rows and margins and the half-cut triangle shape? So let's take a look at the type of design Chen is referencing in his question. So in the course, I had this type of design here, which I create from scratch. So how do I create something like this, where I have the spacing between these columns, between the rows, exactly as I want it to be? So when you're working in Canva and you're creating a custom design, how do you space elements and how do you take control of that so you really can precisely, down to the pixel, have everything located within your design exactly where you want it to be located? So let's dive in. So I'm going to go back down to the bottom of this page here, and what I'm going to do is add a new page, and we'll work from scratch here. And so let's talk about how do we create something like this. So first, let me just say, this is for a Pinterest graphic here, so I have this longer format where it's taller than it is wide, but the principles we're going to talk about in this lesson really apply to any sort of dimensions you're working with. So whatever your design is, if you're building something horizontally that's wider, if you're building something that's vertically taller, it doesn't matter. All the principles we discuss in this video are going to apply, and you should be able to apply them to any design project you do within Canva. Okay, so let me scroll up here to the top of this design to the first page, and let's take a look at the first page here. Now it looks like basically in this design, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 rows, and then basically we have 2 columns. Now we have an element here at the top, this blue background that stretches both these columns, but you can think of this basically as a design that you can break into 4 rows and 2 columns. And a lot of times when you're creating a design, you may have this sort of structure in the back of your mind where you are sort of basing your design off of rows and columns. Now, just eyeballing it, I can't exactly tell if this here is the exact same height as this, so it might not be an exactly perfectly spaced 4x2 layout here, but it's pretty close at least. And so that's what we're going to go for first, because Canva does have tools when you're laying things out and you specifically have a number of rows and columns in mind, where it can do a lot of the work for you. Now, there are multiple methods we will discuss in this video, but let's start by looking at the way Canva will allow you to build something sort of on this row and column layout. So I'm going to go down to our new page here, and I'll scroll down here. Now on this page, what I'm going to do is first I'm going to hit Shift+R, and if I go under my menu here under File and we go under View Settings, we see that Shift+R allows you to show rulers and guides, and whenever you're doing this sort of layout, it is a decent idea to have this turned on. So I'm going to hit Shift+R, and you can see what that does is it brings up these rulers on the side, Shift+R, and also if I drag in a guide, so I'll just drag one down real quick, you can sort of hover over the rulers and then pull down a guide, and once I have it there, I see it on screen. It's this blue line here. Now if I hit Shift+R again, you can see that both the rulers disappear and that guide that I dragged out onto the screen also disappear. also disappears. So I'll hit Shift plus R again, and we can see we can bring it back, and you can see I can hover over the other ruler, and then I can click with my left mouse button and drag out another guide. Now, if you want to get rid of all your guides, you can come under File, View Settings. You can clear your guides using Clear Guides here. You can also just drag them off screen like this. Multiple ways to sort of put guides on your screen and get rid of guides. But let's have it automatically put the guides we want on screen for a 4x2 layout. So that's going to be 4 rows going down the screen and 2 columns across the screen. So to do that, you can come under that same menu. So we can come under File, we can come under View Settings, and we have this Add Guides. And so by default, it has some default choices you can make. So 12 columns, 6 columns, 3 columns. Although usually those aren't very helpful because that's probably not exactly what you want to do. Maybe it is, and if so, you can use it. But a lot of times what you're going to want to do is use this custom button here. So we're going to come under the custom button here, and now we can go in and tell exactly how many columns we want, how many rows we want, but also the margins we want sort of on the columns and the margins we want on the rows, and then also the gaps that we want in between. So let's imagine that we want a 4x2 layout. But then if I scroll back up to the screen here, to this first one here, you can see that I do have sort of this white border that goes all the way around. And again, this white lines and spacing in between. So I want 4x2, but if I just type in 4x2 and had no gaps or no margins, we're not going to get exactly what we want because we do want some margins and we do want some gaps between our rows. So let me just start by typing in the number of columns. So we want 2 columns. That's going to be across the screen. So we'll put 2. And then as you do this, anytime you type something and click into another box, it's going to go ahead and apply that. So if I do 2 rows and then I click into another box, it's going to apply that. I actually wanted 4 rows, right? So let me go back and change this to 4. And then I'll come up here. Let me just set this gap to 0 for a second and click somewhere else. So you can see 4x2, but if I did my design like this, I don't have any margins, you know, above or below or to the left or to the right. And in between these rows, I don't have any margins as well. And a lot of times you are going to want that spacing in between your rows and sort of margins. So these are all settings you can take control of. Now, this is going to depend somewhat on the size of your design in terms of how big you want these, but you can also just try something and then visually see what you have on screen. But let me just show you also, if you come under that file menu, you can see right up here, anytime if you forget what you set for the dimensions of your design, it's going to appear here. So I can see that for this particular custom size, I used 800 pixels for my width and 2000 pixels for my height. Okay, so let me come back under that view settings. Remember, we were in under view settings, and we're going to choose this add guides. And under here, we have this menu here. And remember, we have 4x2, but we want to go in and add sort of some margins for our rows and for our columns, and then also a gap. So let's try setting each of these to 25 pixels. So you don't have to type the pixel part here. I'm just going to type 25 and then click into the next thing. And as I do that, you can see them start to appear. So now we have 25 for our outside of our rows or columns, and then the same thing top and bottom, we have a margin there as well. Now we also want to set the gap, so let's do 25 there, and then we want 25 here as well. So 25, click somewhere else, and now we have this perfectly spaced setup here. So once you have everything you want, you can go ahead and click the add guides. And now if we see, now we have all of these where we have evenly spaced rows, and we also have that spacing outside in our margins, okay? So now if I did something like this, I could come in under my elements, and I could search for a grid. Now, grids and frames in Canva basically just give you a placeholder where you can then go in and you can click on it and change the background color, or you can drag a picture, and that picture will only take up the space defined by that grid. Now, grids and frames in Canva are very similar. There are some quirks and slight differences between them. I think if you're using the bulk create tool and then you want to have it populate into a grid or a frame, I don't think it works with grids currently. It only works with frames. However, they work very much the same. And the reason why I like this single grid element is because then you can resize, and the proportions, you can set them to whatever you want. A lot of the times if you bring in a frame, it might be 4x6 in dimensions, and you don't have these side and top and bottom corners. You can only drag from a corner. You can't drag from the sides. And so if it's 4x6 to 4x6, it's always going to be relatively 4x6. No matter how you drag it out, you can't change the sort of proportions. But here with this, I can exactly drag it out, and as I do, it will snap to my guides. So if I get it, I can snap it exactly to my guides there. And then once I've done that, I can Alt click. So what I'm going to do is hold down my Alt button, click, and then hold down Shift, and it'll drag it over, and I can snap it into place on the other side. Again, I can hold down my left mouse button, drag across to select both of these, and then again, holding down my Shift mouse button, my Alt mouse button, and then also Shift, and then drag down, and boom. And so what the Alt does is when you select something and you hold down that Alt key, that's letting Canva know I want to make a copy. And so then when you drag out with that Alt button held down, it's going to make a copy. Now if you add in the Shift button just tells Canva you want to move in a straight line. Now I could hold down my Alt key and drag out these two, and then I could move them anywhere, but let me hit Control Z to undo that. If I held down my Alt button and then my Shift button, I can only drag it straight up and down in a straight line. Well, let me hit Control Z. Let me make sure I select both of these. And what I could actually do now is select all four. So again, you could drag a selection box around multiple items, select them all, and now you're working with that collective group of items. And now if I do Alt Shift, I can drag all four of these down, boom, get them to drop in place. And I lost one. Somehow I didn't have that final one selected, but we'll go ahead and grab it. And so very quickly, I've gone in and I've created this design where I have the spacing exactly what I want, as I want it. Now, if we were trying to recreate something like this here, I actually only had these placeholder grids on these 6 items, and then the top part is just going to be where I have my title. So here I'm just using the regular white background. Here I actually have a blue element, a blue rectangle. So if I wanted something like a blue rectangle down here, I could just get rid of this one. I could get rid of this one, and let me just hit the R key, which is a keyboard shortcut for rectangle. Now I have this. Now once again, those guides are going to work for me because things are snapping to the guides, and very quickly I could drag something out. And now if you ever get to a point in your design where you have the layout pretty much locked in terms of your spacing, and you no longer want to see those guides because they're a little distracting, then you could hit Shift plus R. Actually, it typed into the rectangle there, so let me make sure it's clicked outside of my rectangle because otherwise it's going to want to type into that shape. So let me do Shift plus R now, and I get rid of those guides. So again, that's the same thing as going under the File menu, View Settings, and use this Show Rulers and Guides. You can use this Shift plus R keyboard shortcut. So then I can just comment on my text here. Let's add a title. I can drag it up here. Again, it'll snap exactly to the center if you just slowly drag it up. And then once you have it snap to the center, let's just put in a placeholder. So I'll just say this is my title. And then obviously you could come in here, you could adjust sizing. Maybe we want it to be larger, right? And then if we wanted to make it even larger, you could grab a corner, you could hold down again the Alt key as you resize so that it does it from the center outwards. Get the spacing as you want. Again, all these things are just little quirks of Canva. You got to play around and you have to experiment and get comfortable with knowing all the different commands, all the different shortcuts. But you can see how very easily using that view file, view settings, and add guides, we were very able to tell it very specifically what we wanted in terms of our layout, okay? Now let me cancel out of this. Now I believe that Chen Ming was also asking about, like, what about the spacing of these triangles? Well, once you have your base sort of layout set up and you have these guides in place and you have shapes in place or grids in place, then basically the work is done for you. So if I were going to come in here now and search for triangles, let me come under elements here. I'm just going to search for triangle and get some results. And so something like this is what I would use. And so I could come in here now and I could start to drag it up here. And then maybe I'm going to zoom in so I can position where I can see better. So let me zoom on screen. We're going to rotate this. So I could start to spin it. and get it rotated, and it's just going to snap into place based on those guidelines. And then of course I might want to size it down, and let's just say I'm going to change the color to blue or something like that. And so that might be how I want to use the element in my design. So let me just fit to the screen again here. Now if I wanted to space this evenly, we can see that actually I have it sort of positioned incorrectly, but it is going to snap exactly to these guides. And then I could hover over this sort of move arrow. But again, remember that trick of holding down the Alt key. So the Alt key and drag it over, get this one to snap, drag them both, and then again, Alt key. This time I'm going to do Alt and Shift, drag down, oops. So you notice when I did this here, I'm selecting the background elements as well. So what I'll do instead is I'll click directly on that blue triangle, then I'm going to hold down the Shift key, click on this one. Now I have these two selected and not these underlying elements selected. Now I'll do my Alt Shift trick again, drag down, boom, get those in place. Again, Alt Shift, drag down, boom, let those fall into place. Okay, and then Shift plus R to hide my guides there. So you do have all these tools where Canva will snap into place when you have guides in place. You create your layout, you have guides on screen. Those are all things that can be very helpful and just let you get this spacing exactly the way you want it. Now let me show you a couple other ways you could do this and a couple other tools and tricks within Canva that let you totally take control of the spacing. Okay, so this one we were thinking it was exactly 4x4, but let me actually turn on that grid again. I'm going to hit Shift plus R again just to turn on my guides, and it'll apply that to every page now. And if I go up here, I can see that actually, if you look at the spacing of this initial one here, you can see that this actually isn't exactly a four equal rows, because you can see that this one here actually ends farther down. This one's farther down. So this wasn't exactly 4x4. A 4x2, excuse me. The spacing was actually different, but for our purposes, when we wanted to use that tool and keep it exactly precise, that's when that file add guides was helpful. But what about something where we know they're going to be different? For example, here I have two square elements on screen, and then my title obviously takes up a different amount of space, right? So this can't be really seen as having precise columns and grids, because these two columns, if we think of them as columns at the bottom, are obviously bigger in size than this is here. So let's imagine we wanted to create something like this here. That's something where we're not going to use that file add guides. We may have to do something more manually because we know we have differentially spaced columns and rows. So let me just come down here. Let's create a new page here. I'm just going to turn off all those guides. So let's just use Shift plus R to hide them. It doesn't mean they're not still there. They're still there if we turn them back on, Shift R. So we're gonna have to think about that, because if I hit Shift R to bring up a guide, it's gonna bring up that screen. And I have all those guides still there. However, you don't always have to start with guides. Sometimes you can just have a concept in your head of what you want to do. So maybe I know I'm going to have two square images here, and I want placeholders for those images. Maybe I do know that I want slight margins on the outsides of those images. Maybe I know if they're going to be above and below each other, I want a slight margin in between those images. So how would I do something like that? Well, let's just go under our elements here. Again, I love starting with this grid element. You can use a specific frame, but I love to start with a single grid just because I can resize it to anything I want. As I drag out, I can see the actual size, width, and height, so I could try to get this exactly to 800. But if you're struggling with that, you can just also come under this position menu here, and then when you're under position and you have something selected, you're going to see under this arrange all the specific stats. So in other words, if I come in here and make this 800, now I know that this is 800 by 800, and remember, we know that our design was 800 pixels wide and 2000 pixels tall. So imagine that I want 25 pixel margins to the left and right again. Well, all I have to do is come in here and say, okay, I want the width to be 750. Because using some basic math, 750, 25 on each side, that's going to add up to 800. And so now I want this to be exactly in the center of the screen. So I'll wait until Canva snaps to the center and shows me that line. And then I can see that that's exactly has a 25 pixel margin here and a 25 pixel margin there. And I also can see here this spacing, right, where it is actually in the X and Y position. So it's going to show you the top left corner is where this X coordinate is. So I know I'm at the X25, so 25 pixels across the screen, and I'm 749 pixels down here is where I am in terms of up and down. But so if I hit shift and drag this down and put it at the bottom there, now I can see that I'm at a Y coordinate of 1175 pixels. Okay, so remember that this is 800 in height. So let's say we want it to be a square. So let's start by making this a square. This shape isn't exactly a square. So let's make it 750. Okay, so 750, 1175. So let's bump this down even more. So shift, and it's going to snap at 1225. So if we actually take 1225 and then we add the full height of this, which is 750, now we actually have 1975. So that tells us that we do have a 25 pixel margin at the bottom. Now remember, these XY coordinates, which it's telling you where your element is on screen, represent the top left corner. Okay, so that's why we have to add the height of the object itself to get sort of where we are here and how big the bottom margin is. So that could be a little confusing. So here's another trick you can do. I'm just going to hit R to put a rectangle on screen. Let's say I know I want my spacing sort of for all my columns, sort of the left and right side of the screen, the top of the bottom of the screen, and in between there, any elements I have on the screen. Let's say I always want a 25 pixel spacing, right? Wherever I am in terms of in between elements, in terms of my margins. Well, let me click on this element again, and remember, once you have something selected like this, you can go to the position menu, and then instead of layers, you want to be on this arrange tab, and then we can see everything about that element, its dimensions and where it is on screen. So let's go and type 25 and 25 because we're going to use this element we just created here as our spacing element. Okay, and I could even change the shape of this if I wanted to make it wider and easier to select. But what I can do right now is if I just grab this and I drag it down and I get it to snap to that bottom left corner, now even if I'm just dragging this around, I know that I need it to butt up exactly against this little item here if I'm going to have my spacing exactly right. I know that this is 25 pixels high, 25 pixels wide, so if I really snap right to the corner of that, I know that I have my spacing correct, right? We've measured the dimensions of this, but so let's say we hadn't, and I wanted to drag this over to this side now, I could very easily resize this and know that, boom, I'm getting it exactly right. Now, we have that set where we wanted to. Let's drag this up. Let's put it on top here, and let me zoom out a little bit. Now, let me grab this. I'm going to use, again, that Alt trick for making a copy. Alt, Shift to make sure it's going in a straight line, then boom, put it right there. And again, I've used this little spacing element to make sure I have equal spacing, okay? Again, position it up here. R for a new rectangle. Let's get this new rectangle to snap to the top of that. Drag it out here. It's going to snap to those sides. Boom, boom. Now, it is going to automatically snap here, and it is usually good about snapping at that point where you already have spaced columns. So even without using this, I have a pretty good idea that's getting it right up here. But if it didn't, I could always have that drag down. Again, select your little spacing element, move it up to the very top of the screen, and then grab your element, and then resize. And of course, when you're done getting everything spaced as you wanted, you can come in here and delete this element here, and then boom, you have a nicely spaced layout. So there are different ways you can do things, and I think my goal for this video is just to have you understand the different tools you do have in Canva that help you out with this sort of spacing challenge when you're creating a design, you're creating a layout, and you really want to take control of the spacing. Okay, so I have one more thing I'll show you, but then also for review, let's just review what we covered so far. So one of the strategies you can use if you have something where you have evenly spaced rows and columns that you're using sort of as an underlying grid for your layout, then you can come under this file menu, you can come under the view settings tab, and under here you have this add guides option. If you go under custom, then you really can enter in how many rows you want, how many columns, and margins and gaps, and take total control of what your spacing is. And it'll create that layout, it'll put all those guides into place for you, and then you can use those guides when you're laying out your design. Now, Shift plus R to see your guides, Shift plus R to hide your guides. You can also just sort of eyeball things by dragging them out on the screen. And then remember, once you have an element, you can come under this position menu, and then under the Arrange tab, you can really see and control the exact width and height of an object. And then you also can see exactly where it's positioned on screen in terms of the XY coordinates from the upper left of your object. So if you use this information and then do a little math in your head, you can figure out margins and things like that. But another trick would be if you want to sort of have a spacing object, you can use something like R to put a rectangle on your screen. So again, I could have searched for rectangles and pulled up a shape. I just use that R keyboard shortcut to put a rectangle on screen. And then if I come in here under the position tab, I can see exactly how big this rectangle is. So let's just say I knew that I wanted to have, instead of 25, maybe I want 40 pixels for my spacing between elements on the screen and for my margin. So I could type in 40, 40, 40. Let me just zoom in a little bit here, and then I could drag this over to the side and say, okay, I want this to be 40, so let me drag out till it snaps. Again, to the other side, grab this one, drag in, and I didn't get this exactly to the side. There we go. Again, zoom in if you need to see things even better, just to make sure you're getting correctly. Zoom in, have it snap, and then boom, I know I have 40 pixels there. And if I go to the other side, this should be 40 pixels as well. And of course, if we look at our spacing here, 720, 40 on each side is 80. So that's the 800 width design we have. So again, you have all these different tricks for spacing things in your design and making sure you take control of all those elements on screen. Now I'll show you one more thing. So let me just add a page and fit to page. So let me just fit here. Again, I'll put a basic rectangle on screen, and let's imagine that we had rectangles. They might be the same size, they might be different sizes. So I'll just make these all a little bit different. Alt to drag out a new one. These are all a little different. You also have under this menu here the ability to space things in relation to the screen or relation to each other. So if I select one of these here with just one object, if I use the position menu here and the arrange under this position here, I can space things relative to the screen. So here, if I want to put it at the top, I can put it at the top. If I want to put it at the left, I can put it in the left. I can put it into the center and the middle of my screen, so the exact middle there. But then if I have multiple things selected, now suddenly this spacing is not relative to the page, it's spacing to relative to each other. Let me change the color of one of these just to make this a little bit more obvious. I'll give this a blue color. Let's give this a different color, and let's give this a different color, just to make this a little bit more visually obvious. But if I have both of these here, and now I come under that position, and I come under Arrange, and let's say I do Top Now. Now you see it's just aligning the tops of those objects. I could align the left of those objects. I could make sure that they're middle and center aligned, so they're right on top of each other. Okay, so these are just different ways you can space things on screen. So let's say I want the top object to start here. I want the bottom object here, but then I want things spaced evenly in between. So I could select them all. I could make sure that they are all evenly spaced, so space evenly vertically. Horizontally, let's use vertically like that, and then we want them centered, so let's do the center thing, and suddenly I have things lined up nice and neat, nice and evenly spaced. Okay, so this is just one more tool that you have at your disposal when you're spacing things, aligning things in Canva. So it's going to depend on your project, but you have a lot of different tools you can use. So just practice these tools, get the hang of these tools, and then you will very easily be able to create this sort of custom design very quickly. Then of course, if you have something you like and you want to be able to use it again and again, you can come under this share menu here. And then of course, if you're a pro user, you have the ability to save things as a brand template. And when you save it as a brand template, it'll ask you what folder you wanted to put in. And then whenever you use that design again, when you click on it, it's automatically going to spawn a copy and keep the original. Now, you don't have this brand template option if you're a free Canva user, but you can still create designs, and then when you go to open them, if you want to preserve the original, just make a copy. You can open a copy, okay? So let me just go and show you on the Canva home screen here. So if I come to the home screen here, if I wanted to use this design and I use these three dots here, I could make a copy. Now, if I had an actual template here and I click on it, that's not an actual template because it's open up the original, but if I save as a brand template, then when I click on it, it's going to ask if I want to use that template, and it's going to open up a copy Okay, so these are all the tricks for creating your own custom templates in Canva and making sure you get the spacing evenly. Chen Ming, I hope this was helpful and I hope this answered your question, and I hope it was maybe helpful to others that watched. And if you like tutorials like this, you can check out my course over on Udemy. I'll put a link below, and also just subscribe to this channel because I have lots of free content here as well. Okay, everybody, have a great day.